coming to these sessions and welcome any new people. This is the fourth one. We usually begin with prayer. Maybe we could just begin together with a Hail Mary. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen. So I'm Peter Pelosi, I'm a professor of philosophy at Salve Regina University over in Newport, and this is my parish here, St. Thomas More in Narragansett. And this monthly event, although next month I'm going to be traveling, so we won't be having one in June, so we'll be back in July, is sponsored by the Pro-Life Committee here. And we're just dealing with different moral and social issues connected to the pro-life cause. And you'll notice last month we talked about physician-assisted suicide, and since then the Bishop of Rhode Island asked everyone to participate in trying to stop it from being passed here. And so this was in all the bulletins. That's not the topic of tonight's talk, but there's a way that you can easily send a note to your senators and representatives by using that QR code, but also Peg Fair, one of our co-chairs of the Pro-Life Committee, is at a table back there with a laptop. So you can just, after the Q&A tonight, you can just go over to her table and she'll help you fill it out. It's very easy to fill out and send in. And Barth Bracey was saying that we really need some more of those sent in. Okay, so now let's do tonight's talk. It's called The Morality of Lying. And I want to do both words in that talk, morality and lying. So the first half of the talk will be kind of explaining what is morality? What is that? And then we'll look at lying. And to give you like the end at the beginning, I'm going to be presenting an argument that it's always wrong to lie. And that usually, after I present it, leads to a pretty lively discussion in the Q&A about exceptions and things that people have. So, okay. So, the main points we're going to cover is what is a moral or an immoral action? What is moral character? These are going to be brief. You could have a whole semester on each of these. But what is truth? Because if we want to understand what a lie is, we better understand what truth is. What is a lie? And then 4 reasons why lying is intrinsically immoral. And those are going to be kind of philosophical reasons. Although before I get to those, I have one slide with scripture passages about lying, which are pretty strong. All right, and then we'll have Q&A. Okay, this is a slide just with some references. The Catechism was the reading for today. We always have one reading. And then St. Francis de Sales, Introduction to the Devout Life. It's a beautiful book about the spiritual life. And there's a few passages in there about our topic. And then Dietrich and Alice von Hildebrand wrote a book called The Art of Living. And they have 2 chapters in particular, one on reverence and one on veracity, which is another word for truthfulness, that I'm drawing on. And then Cecil LeBach wrote a famous book on lying. And then Sam Harris, who's an atheist, wrote a short book on lying that's available online, and it's very good. There's a few things I disagree with, but it's very good. Okay. So, what is a moral or an immoral action? And actually, even before I go to the next slide, when philosophers and theologians start talking about morality, they usually break it down into 2 big categories. One is on the screen right now. Moral action. So that's when you do something like rob a bank, which would be an immoral action, or help an elderly person carry their groceries across the street. That's an action. And then there's moral becoming or moral character. That refers to what kind of a person we are on the inside. Do we have vices and virtues in us? And more virtues than vices, hopefully, but what kind of a person we are on the inside. And so philosophers and theologians want to know what are the right and wrong actions, and how do I become a good moral person on the inside, and what's the connection between those. So what is a moral action? Well, every time you do an action, our definition is going to be, it has an effect out in the world, like you're helping the person over there across the street, or you're robbing the bank. It has an effect on other people. Every time you do an action, it has an effect on your own soul. Like when you do something, it makes you into a certain type of person. If you do good actions or bad actions, it will form your character in those ways. And then, not only every time you do an action does it make you into a certain type of person, every time we do an action, it shows other people what kind of person we are on the inside. That's the famous saying, actions speak louder than words. Okay. Now we're going to get more specific. What are the parts of moral actions? And there's actually 3 parts in the catechism of them that help us understand if an action is right or wrong. I'm just going to do 2 of them to start. One, the technical term for it is the moral object. That is a term for the action that you carry out and your choice to do it. These are abstract. I'm going to give an example on the next slide that will make it very clear. And then the intention is your goal, what you want to happen. So like, I might have a goal of needing more money. Then I have to pick something to get my goal accomplished, right? I have to pick an action. So I could pick rob a bank. Then I would accomplish my goal, okay? Or I could pick get a job. So we have goals, but then, so whenever you have a goal, which is your intention, you have to pick something to do to make it real. And that's the moral object, or your action, okay? So now, the Catechism talks about good objects and bad objects. So how I get, and intentions. So how I get this across to the students at the beginning of the semester is I make up an example. Like imagine there's some poor guy in a park, and you walk by him every day on your way to your lunch break to get some food at a food court. And one day, and you've been thinking about this intention, I want to help this poor homeless guy. So one day you get up your courage and you go to the food court and you buy 2 of everything that you were gonna get 1 of. And you tell the person, put a drink in each, put plasticware in each, 2 separate bags. But on your way you said to the guy, do you want some lunch? And he goes, okay, and you go, wait here. And so then you go do that and you come back and you go, here you go. And he says, thanks, man. And you go, you're welcome, have a nice day. So that is, your intention was to help a homeless person, and your object was to buy him a lunch and say a kind word. You wanted to help him, that was your goal, you had to pick something to do. Okay, now I'm going to change the story. Let's say you were walking to lunch and you saw him, and sometimes philosophers have to think up unpleasant things to make points, so I know no one in the room would do this, but let's say your plan was to call him a name and kick him. But then suddenly, in the last minute, you saw someone on a park bench nearby who you'd been meaning to impress for a long time. So you change your plan, and you say, you want some lunch? And he goes, okay. And then you say, all right, wait here. And then you go over there, and you get 2, and you come back, and then you give him the lunch, making sure that the person on the park bench notices you give him the lunch, but doesn't know that you're making sure that they notice that you're giving them. Okay? So there, what happened? Your intention was bad. It was to show off. But your object was actually good. You bought lunch for some poor guy and he got food in his stomach. But in that case, you did not become a better person. For that to happen, your intention and your object both have to be good. So now we've done good intention, good object, that's a good act. Bad intention, good object. So now we got to do good intention, bad object. So an obvious example of that, and like the things we've been talking about is, you want to help a poor, homeless, pregnant woman. That's a good object. Now you have to pick a way to do it. If you pick abortion, that's a bad object. Or if you want to help a sick person get less suffering, if you pick a bad object, that would be euthanizing them. A good object in both cases would be help the woman find a place to live, and like we saw at the dinner the other night with the raising the money for the new home for the pregnant women up there in Providence. Or help people relieve their pain without killing them. Okay, but anyways, let's get back to our example. So here, good intention, help a homeless person. I want to help this guy. How about I see someone else eating lunch, I push them over, take their lunch, and give it to that guy. That would be a bad object, but you accomplished a good intention. So it's still a bad act overall. Okay? All right. And then just to round it out, a bad intention to hurt a homeless person, kick him. That would be a bad intention and a bad object. So the point of all this is, if your acts are going to be morally good, they must have a good intention and a good object. If they have bad of either or both, it's not a good act, a morally good act. Okay. Now, the point of that is, one of the points of everything I just said is that there are some moral objects, some actions that you can pick to do that are so bad, you should never pick them. No matter how noble your intention is, even if you could save the whole world, don't do that. Like torture a child. Someone says, if you torture that child, you'll save. No, you do not do it. You just pray that God helps the world. That's the name. The name for that is an intrinsically immoral action. Something that no intention and no circumstance could ever make into a good choice. Okay, so moral relativists, they don't think there's anything like that. But Catholics, we do think there are some things intrinsically immoral. You may never pick them. It's evil. Okay. And so that's a quote from the Catechism. There are acts which in and of themselves, independently of circumstances and intentions, are always gravely illicit by reason of their object. That means because of the kind of act they are. And they give some examples: blasphemy, perjury, murder, adultery. Nothing can justify doing those. That's where we get into the idea of martyrdom. You would rather die than do an intrinsically immoral action. Okay. So these are intrinsically immoral actions. No intention or circumstances could turn them into a morally good choice. Circumstances, I didn't talk about them to save time, but basically if you have like a professional thief, let's say, who's robbing all kinds of stuff, versus a kid who like steals a candy bar and gets in trouble and apologizes. Which one's going to jail? The thief, not the kid. But that doesn't mean the stealing that the kid did was right. It's just the circumstances like diminish the intensity of the badness. Okay, so circumstances can't turn a bad act into a good one, but they can reduce culpability and other things. So I'm not go into depth on that point in tonight's talk. The point I want to make is some actions are so evil, no circumstance, no intention can ever justify picking them. Now, by the way, under severe duress, sometimes we pick actions and maybe the culpability is very low, maybe even zero in some cases, but that's a separate point. It doesn't mean the act was good. It means the level of guilt is lower for various reasons. You've heard the famous saying, the end does not justify the means. Now you can understand it. The end means your intention, your goal. And the goal does not justify the means. That means your object. It means, really the saying means, the intention does not justify doing an intrinsically immoral object. One may not, another way to put it, Catechism, one may not do evil so that good may result. Right? And so now, we're starting to get into the topic of tonight's talk. I'm going to make an argument that says, you may not tell a lie. That would be an action. You have a goal, whatever it is. Well, I listed some there. You want to get out of trouble. You want to make someone feel better. You want to get away with something. You want to save someone's life. Those are all goals. Those are intentions. And a lot of times when we have an intention like one of those, you could accomplish it by telling a lie. And the Catechism says, don't pick that. Find some other way to accomplish the goal, if it's a good one, like saving someone's life. Don't do it with a lie. Okay. Okay, briefly, moral becoming, moral character. So I'll do this one quicker. This one is saying, what kind of person are you on the inside? Because when I get to the argument about lying, I'm going to make some points that have to do with external affairs that show why lying is immoral, and some with internal. And so, moral character means, do I have virtues that are the lasting attitudes inside me, like generosity, kindness, honesty, and so forth, or do I have vices that characterize my personality, like rudeness or crudeness or meanness, or those are vices. And some people we're all maybe a mixture of those, and we're all work in progress, trying to become more virtuous, then more vicious. Okay, and then also happiness versus misery, which is a word for profound unhappiness. Aristotle writes a lot about how do we become truly happy. And he thinks one of the keys is to become genuinely virtuous on the inside. And then Thrasymachus is a guy in Plato's Republic who Socrates is duking it out with. And they have this debate about if you have to pick, like I talked about a professional thief before. If you could be a thief like that and get away with it for the rest of your life and die a peaceful death and no one knew, or be one of the people he robs over and over again, which would you pick? It's funny to ask the students that, because some pick the thief and some pick. But Thrasymachus said, I want to be the thief. I want to be a tyrant who can get away with everything. And Socrates said, no, if I have to pick one of those two, I'm going to be the person who gets robbed. Because nobody can make your soul evil. If someone comes up and punches you, that doesn't make you evil. But if you go up and punch an innocent person, that's worse for you. It makes your soul evil. So when Socrates was asked, would you rather suffer some physical harm or become a bad human being? He says, that's a no-brainer. Suffer the physical harm. I want my soul to stay good. Okay. And then Aristotle said, how do we get virtue? He said it in a lot of ways, but one is, if you do actions, actions just take, one definition of an action is it has a beginning and an end in time, and then it's over. Like when you help the person cross the street, it starts, and then it ends, and then you go on your way. Or when you give the guy the lunch, it starts, and then it ends, and you go on your way. Or when you tell a lie, it might only take 2 seconds, beginning and an end in time. Or if you do helpful acts like that over and over, Aristotle said, gradually you will become imbued with the spirit of generosity. That's how it grows. And then you'll be more likely to do generous acts once you grow in that virtue. Okay. So that's very brief description of what a moral and an immoral action are. It has to have a good intention and a good action. And what moral character is. Very brief. And then the key point, the way it connects to the pro-life issues and the question we're talking about tonight, which is lying, is that there are some things that are always wrong to do, and you have to pick some other way to help the person. Okay. Now, if we're going to talk about lying, we better get a quick definition of what is truth, which is the opposite of lying. So there's these theories that are called truth theories. And if there's a theory about truth, it doesn't mean it's a correct theory about truth. So I'm going to put 3 on here, 3 truth theories. And the third one is going to help us when we try to understand what's wrong with lying. So the first truth theory is called the consensus theory of truth. And this one says a proposition is true if all or the majority of people believe it is true. And we could say a proposition, or in place of that word we could say a thought or an assertion. So to make a silly example, a long, long time ago, supposedly, the majority of people on Earth thought the Earth was flat. And they went around thinking that and saying that. And now everybody thinks and says the Earth is more or less spherical. And in the middle time, let's say when they were debating it, there was 50-50. But during all three of those time periods, the earth didn't particularly care what anybody was thinking. It was just sitting there being spherical. And all the people who said to each other, it's flat, were wrong, even though they were at one point in the majority. So I'm criticizing the consensus theory of truth. Consensus is important. If a lot of people think something somewhere, they're probably onto something. Like, I'm not saying the people back then who thought that were crazy. You know, they lived in places like Kansas and they're like, seems flat to me. They weren't crazy. They were just wrong about the planet, okay? But consensus is usually grounded in some... The problem with the consensus theory of truth is people who really think that's the only thing truth is, they become manipulators. They just try to... That's how, like, the media and so forth works. They just want to force consensuses to brainwash people. So consensus is not the foundation of truth. Okay. The coherence theory of truth, this one says a proposition or an assertion is true if it can be argued to with logical consistency. So logic is very important for making arguments and discussions and so forth. So usually on first class of logic day, it says if A then B, if B then C, therefore if A then C. Maybe you've seen those syllogisms. And then people say, to put meat on it, they'll say, Socrates is a man, all men are mortal, therefore Socrates is mortal. And it's true, he's dead. So that's a logically correct way of arguing. But I can do the exact same logical argument with these words. All white things are made of cheese. The moon is a white thing. Therefore, the moon is made of cheese. That is logically sound, but invalid. Because the first premise, all white things are made of cheese, is false. Okay? So logic is important for truth, but it's not the reason why things are true. Correspondence theory of truth. This one says a proposition is true if it corresponds with or matches reality. So truth on this theory is when our thoughts and the things we say match the way things really are, that is truth. That's why in that last example, all white things are made of cheese. This is white, this panel here, and this thing, they're not made of cheese. So that first premise is not true in the sense of correspondence because it doesn't match how things really are. That is the real definition of truth. When the things we say and think line up with the way things really are. That's the foundation of truth. The other two can be important, but okay. And then knowledge. And this is going to connect to lying. So knowledge and truth are very connected to each other. You might think they're the same thing. They're not exactly the same, but they're deeply related. Knowledge is when you, the subject of knowledge, who can think, have thoughts that line up with reality. Like if you want to get to know something like a cell and you look through it at a microscope and you really carefully let it reveal itself and you understand all of its parts and you really get it, that's knowledge. Then you might go tell somebody about a cell and then your statements would be true because they match the way the cell is. It's very basic. There are opposites to knowledge. One is error. Like if you say to a child who hasn't studied math yet, what is 376 times 16? And the kid says, 7. That's just an error. They're wrong. If the kid said, the second opposite to knowledge is ignorance. And the word ignorance is not an insult like they use it. I'm using it in its technical, true sense. It means to not know. So if the kid says, I don't know, I didn't study that yet. That's ignorance. It just means not knowing. So error and ignorance are obvious opposites to knowledge, but they're two different kinds. Error is an assertion. And if you just have an error, it doesn't mean you're lying, because you could be asserting something you think is true, but you're just wrong. Okay? You just need to be corrected. So not knowing and saying something that doesn't match reality, those are opposites to knowledge, or thinking something that doesn't match reality. And then opinion is not knowledge. Opinion might be an educated guess, but like if I said, what's the Pythagorean theorem? And someone said, I remember learning that. I think it's a cubed plus b cubed equals c cubed. And someone else said, I think it's a squared plus b squared equals c squared. And you're both kind of have just an opinion because you don't remember. If I give you both the tests, the squared person is going to get an A and the other person is going to get an F. But, but it's just an opinion. Knowledge is when you know you know. Okay, now let's get into the real question of tonight. So,
So would perception be the same as opinion?
Perception in the broad sense is a cognition. So for all the things I said, that's a good question. You have to grasp things. You have to take things in. So eyesight would be like if I said, and perception is a cognition, okay? And so if you want to get knowledge, you have to very carefully perceive things. You have to pay really, like if you want to understand a cell, you have to perceive it accurately and let it show itself to you. So perception is taking in information, and if you are careful about that, you will have, the thing will give you the gift of knowledge by revealing its essence to you when you take the time to carefully perceive it. We can come back to that more too. Okay. So that's like part one. So now part two. What is a lie? And why is it wrong? So the Catechism notes that one of the 10 Commandments says, you shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. Now in this section of the Catechism, what we learn is there's many ways to bear false witness, not just a lie. I'm mostly going to be talking about a lie tonight, but I listed some of the others here, and if you want to, we can talk about them in the Q&A. And there's even more than this in the Catechism. So lying is the one we're going to talk about, but false witness, like if you're on the stand and you actually say a false thing in a court case, that's bearing false witness, and it can have a horrific effect of letting the innocent go to jail and the guilty go free. If you do that under oath on the stand, that's perjury. It's even worse. Rash judgment is believing too quickly bad things about other people. In that book, St. Francis de Sales, it's so beautiful, his section on rash judgment, and we all fall into these things all the time. But he says something in there like, if there's 100 possible interpretations of what someone did, pick the best one. Especially if you don't have all the information, rather than pick the worst one, okay? So rash judgment is picking the worst interpretation of people's actions. Detraction and calumny are two subspecies of what's called slander. So detraction happens when you know something bad about another person and you go blabbing it around to people who have no need to know it. And the Catechism talks about how one way we can honor the dignity of each other is by protecting their reputations. There are times when we do have to say something bad about somebody that's true, it's a real fault of theirs that you know, to other people, when it's not a sin. So that would be if you're at your wit's end trying to help a loved one and you need to tell someone else because you need help. That's not detraction. Or if they're gonna hurt somebody and you have to tell the police, not detraction. Or protect someone who that person is after and you tell them. Or none of that is detraction. The sin of detraction happens when you know something bad about someone and you just start telling people for no reason. And the only effect that has is to hurt that person's reputation. And the thing is, we all have flaws. So the best way to think about it is, would you want people who know your flaws to just tell everyone? No, because we have a right to a good reputation. We're all a work in progress. Calumny differs from detraction, because calumny is when you make up a false bad thing about someone and spread that around. That's really mean. Both of them are kind of mean. But detraction has a little more sense to it because it's true. But this is, you just make up a lie about somebody and spread it. That's calumny. And then flattery, insincerity, exaggeration, boastfulness, it goes on in the catechism, and it explains how each one is kind of a violation of this commandment. Okay, so, but we want to talk about, okay, so lying is wrong, and I'm asking the question, do we just obey this, or can we understand why? And that's one of the points of this lecture series that we were talking about in the pro-life committee. It seems like a lot of people know what the church teaches on different things like abortion, contraception, euthanasia, whatever. But do people understand the rationale behind it? And maybe the answer there is not as much as we should. And so if you start to explain it, you can see the goodness of the truth. And then that can inspire you to want to live according to it, even if it's hard. And so let's see if we can understand why lying is wrong. Okay, so first, a two-part definition of a lie. And this is from the Catechism and St. Thomas Aquinas. And both of these parts have to happen for a lie to exist. So we're going to use the stuff that we studied in the first part of tonight's lecture. So the first part you need for a lie is an assertion. You have to make an assertion to somebody that doesn't match reality. Okay? Like if I said, an example of one of those is there are 700 people in this room. That's an example of an assertion that doesn't match reality. But I'm not lying to you, I'm just giving you an example of an assertion that doesn't match reality. Okay, now, if you do one of those, you say something that doesn't match reality and you know it doesn't, with the intention to deceive the other person. That's a lie. You say something you know doesn't match reality to somebody else to deceive them because you have some ulterior motive. That's what a lie is. Okay. Okay. Now, 4 reasons why lying is intrinsically immoral. And I put this sentence here from Pope John Paul II, the opening line of his letter on faith and reason. And it says, faith and reason are like 2 wings on which the human spirit rises to the contemplation of truth. It's very beautiful. Faith and reason are like 2 wings on which the human spirit rises to the contemplation of truth. He says we need both, like I was saying before. What does the church teach, and can we understand it? So let's start with kind of divine revelation and faith before I get to the 4 reasons. This is really surprising. I found one website that collected 150 Bible verses about lying. There's a lot in there. All right, so these are a few Bible verses about lying. So hold on to your seats. Proverbs, sorry, these are a little small. I'll read them. Proverbs 6 says, "These 6 things doth the Lord hate, a proud look, a lying tongue, and hands that shed innocent blood." Psalm 101, "No one who practices deceit shall dwell in my house. No one who utters lies shall continue before my eyes." John 8:44, "You are of your father the devil. He, the devil, was a murderer from the beginning. There is no truth in him. He is a liar and the father of lies." Colossians, "Do not lie to one another." seeing that you have put off the old nature with its practices and put on the new. And Revelations, last one. Blessed are those who wash their robes, they may enter the city by the gates. Outside are the dogs and sorcerers, and the sexually immoral and murderers and idolaters, and everyone who loves and practices falsehood. So it's so striking that it seems that God thinks lying is just as bad as murder. So let's see if we can understand why. Now there are venial versions of lying, venial sins, and there's no venial murder. There could be less culpability, but in any case, you can see how seriously God takes lying. And I think, like, one of the things in the class when I have this lecture, it comes out that lying is rampant now. Like, it's second nature. People lie to each other all the time for like no reason, and students will tell me, they lie if they just don't want to go somewhere. Instead of telling the person the reason, they'll just lie to avoid discomfort. So lying is very, very common now, okay? And I think that's a big problem in our society. And I almost want to say, we can complain if we want about the lies of the politicians at the highest level of government, but I think we're not allowed to complain about that if we're lying to each other all the time in little ways. It builds up. Okay, so that's the Bible. So now, people will be like, why is God so serious about lying? So let's see if we can explain it. So 4 philosophical reasons, and strictly speaking, these should be understandable by anybody, even if they don't believe in God. Okay, so I'll name what they are, and then I'll do them one at a time, and then we'll have Q&A. So one is lying is a violation of being or reality. One is lying is a violation of another person. One is lying is a violation of yourself, by yourself. And one is a violation of the communion of persons, or community. So I'm just going to do a little description of each of these. Okay, so, and this one I get from the Hildebrands book, The Art of Living, or a lot of these things I'm going to say. So we can speak. Human beings can speak. It's amazing. Animals can't speak. And this fact that we can talk yields, I think, a certain responsibility to use our speech to witness accurately about reality. We're supposed to use our speech to witness accurately about reality. And Hildebrand says that liars are irreverent. They are irreverent towards reality. There's a certain, like when God created the whole world, after each day, he said, it's good, it's good, it's good, it's good. What does that mean? It means there's like beauty and value built into reality, like even in every little blade of grass. And what somebody so you're lying about something in reality. What somebody who lies about reality is irreverent because they're thinking that there's nothing greater than them. I mean, obviously, people are created on the 6th day, so in one sense, we're greater than all the non-personal world. But this is a different meaning of, a bad meaning of thinking nothing's greater than you. The liar thinks that the world doesn't have this goodness that God put in it, inside itself. Instead, everything out there is just a plaything for me to speak about and use however I want to get what I want. That's why it's actually irreverent towards reality. The liar is irreverent towards reality. He thinks of as if he's God, not in the true sense of God, and forgets that being is there to be discovered and to be spoken about truthfully. And that's how we're supposed to use our gift of speech. Okay, the next one. So not only do you lie about someone, which is about something, which is irreverent to do, but you also lie to a person when you lie, all right? Now this takes a little bit of explaining to get this point, but this I think is the most powerful argument that lying is intrinsically immoral. So every time we make an assertion to another person, every assertion has a content and a claim. So here's an example of an assertion that I said before. The earth is flat. That's an assertion. Or if you go up to one of your friends about a mutual friend and you say, hey, she bought that new car. That's an assertion. Assertions are different from questions. If I say, is the earth flat? I'm not claiming anything is true. I'm just asking a question. Or if I say, did she buy the car? We don't know. But if you say something to someone that's like a declarative sentence, the earth is flat, or she bought a new car, built into every assertion that we say to each other is the claim, without even having to say it out loud, that this is how it really is. This is how it really is. You're saying this is true every time you say the earth is flat or she bought the car. One way to get this across to people is interesting. If you come across a complete skeptic and they come up to you and say, there's no truth, you could prove that person wrong by saying, oh yeah, what about 2 + 2 is 4? But you could also say, if they say there's no truth, then you can say, oh yeah, what about that? Is it true that there's no truth? And they're like stuck. And the reason they're stuck is because you can't say anything without, it's unavoidable. You mean it's how things are. That's why there was a radical skeptic in the ancient times named Cratylus who wanted to be a complete skeptic, and every time he said there's no truth, people said, you're saying it's true that there's no truth. And he was, it's kind of cynical, he was so committed to his skepticism that instead of admitting that, he decided to stop talking for the rest of his life. Yeah. But he even still moved his finger for yes and no questions. So you cannot deny truth without reintroducing it. Okay, it's impossible. Every time we make an assertion, we're saying it's true without even having to say it. Okay, now, because that is how our assertions are, think about this for a minute. What happens inside you if your friend comes up to you and says, I bought a new car? What happens inside you? Okay, now I'm glad you both said those two things. So someone over here said you're happy for them, right? But something happens before the happiness. You believe them. First you believe them, then you're happy. Now that one, the belief, happens automatically. Let's just think about this for a minute. This is actually something very beautiful and precious. When people come up to us and make assertions to us, we naturally and automatically, without even thinking about it, we believe them. And it's because the assertion has this claim to being true, okay? So it is a gift, this gift of trust that you give to someone when they make an assertion to you, okay? It's a beautiful gift of trust, okay? A liar knows that that's going to happen, and they use it against you. That's why some people call lying stealing. You're stealing that gift of trust that someone just gave you. Okay. That's why it's a violation of the person. That it's very beautiful that there's this fundamental trust that we start with. And it's very ugly that liars know that and use it against people.
Could you give an example of that, what you just said?
Could be anything. If I want you to, any lie. If I could get $1 million, if you believe anything, I could just say, if you believe I bought a new car, gets me money, and I say, hey, Gene, I bought a new car. And then you go tell someone, I get my money. And I just used you. So what you have to do is try to think of a time, this is maybe unpleasant, you could do it in either of these two ways. When you've lied to someone, we've all done it. Or maybe it's more palpable when you've been lied to and then you realized it later. And that degrading feeling that you feel you've been degraded. You've been disrespected, that ugly feeling. And that sadness that you're never going to be able to trust this person again. Why does that happen? It happens precisely because it's an abuse of this gift of trust that you naturally gave. And the person willingly used it against you. So that, you said give an example, every single lie. Every single deliberate lie to use someone to get something. Okay. The liar knows this. It's stealing their trust. Okay, now, it's also, now we can go back to the moral character point. The third reason is, lying's wrong, number one, because you're violating reality, irreverence to being. Number two, violation of the other person, because you're using their trust against them. And now the third one, every time you lie, you do something to yourself. You violate yourself. You make yourself into a certain type of person, which isn't good. First of all, like I said before, think about it. Just think about times when you've lied or were about to lie. You can feel that split between your head and your heart. You can just feel it because you know what's true and what you're about to say isn't. The only people who don't feel that are people who've lied so much they killed their conscience. Okay? If you can still feel that, that's a good sign. So you can feel that split between your head and your heart. You can feel your moral integrity splitting when you're about to tell a lie. And then I just said loss of integrity. And then what happens is you make yourself untrustworthy. In other words, it's not just people won't trust me if they find out I lied. You become the kind of person who can't be trusted. You become the kind of person who can't be trusted. Now, obviously, we've all slipped up and lied, and we go to confession or we apologize to the person, so it takes time to become an actual, totally dishonest human being through this. But that's what happens. So that's why it's a violation of yourself by yourself. You do this to yourself when you lie. And then the fourth one, just to repeat them, the first one is you violate reality because you're irreverent to it. Second one, you violate the person you lie to because you're stealing their trust, using it against them. Third one, you violate yourself by wrecking your moral integrity. And now, the communion of persons. So Immanuel Kant gives this as one of his main reasons why lying isn't immoral, and so does the Catechism. I think I have, I might skip Kant's argument because it's a bit long, but the Catechism has this profound quote right here. Men could not live with one another if there were not mutual confidence that they were being truthful to one another. Men could not live with one another if there were not mutual confidence that they were being truthful to one another. Now, what I want to say here is something like this. You actually could have like a functioning society with a humming economy that was all based on lies. Maybe that's ours in some extent. But that's not a healthy human community. In a community like that, everyone is kind of squinting at everyone else, wondering what they're trying to get from me or if they're lying. A healthy community, which is what the Catechism means there, is that trust I was talking about on point 2, everyone knows about that. That when I make assertions to other people, they're going to give me this precious gift of their trust without even thinking about it. And I'm going to respect that. I'm not going to stomp on it. I'm going to respect it. And if you live in a society where people want to respect each other like that, and everybody knows that they want to respect each other, that is a healthy community, not just a functioning one, okay? Because people are really loving each other by respecting that trust that they give each other. Okay, and then, so the argument is now we have these, so we have all those Bible verses. God doesn't like lying. And now, but then I switched to reason, and I gave you the 4 reasons that explain why lying. The idea is every time we lie, so we don't just, now we should obey the Bible, and we should obey the Pope and all that, but now we understand why, which is every time I tell a lie, these 4 things happen. I'm irreverent to reality, I steal someone's trust, I hurt my integrity, and I wreck society. That's why it's wrong. You can see it, you can feel it, you can understand it. And so that gives you a reason to want to not lie. We don't just have to blindly obey it because the Bible says so, which is good to obey authority when it's good authority, but we can also understand why. Okay. So, yeah. So, and I do want to make a connection, but maybe I'll make the connection to this after. How about we just have a few minutes if you want to of question and answer right now, and you can even push back. A lot of people do during this talk. They say, hey, wait a minute, what about this? So any questions or thoughts about this? And then before I send you over to Peg, I'm going to make a connection between lying and euthanasia, but I'll save that for later.
So children, when you're trying to teach them as a parent,
Yes.
to be truthful, you got some suggestions as to how to get that across? Because I think it's very fundamental in being a parent or even a grandparent. I mean, we used to say things like, I can tell by your eyes that you're lying.
Yeah.
Something like that.
It is kind of fun because one thing I do with this in the semesters, and I cover this topic in a lot of my classes, and in part, I have to admit, I love the students, but I also think that in order to not get marked absent and other things, lies come my way. So, and a lot of times they'll tell about the lying and so forth. And so one of the reasons why I do this lecture is to just try to get everyone to be aware of it. But it is interesting, I'll have essays written, all handwritten essays, because now, that it's another aspect of dishonesty, using the internet and AI to do things. So all my tests are handwritten. But I had one this semester where a girl wrote that she lied once, and she was a littler girl, and it was so obvious to her mother, and she said, my mother made me write like 500 times something because of it. And the girl wrote to me in the essay, she said, ever since then I don't lie anymore. Sometimes I might talk around something, but I don't lie anymore. So yeah, you have to, but so that was a mother who really did something, and I can remember too, lying and getting grounded in things, and that's an important thing, yeah.
Hello, when someone says to you, can I tell you a secret and promise not to tell anybody?
Right, so that one, that comes up in a lot of the, so you might, one way that puts yourself in a difficult situation, so you could say no. You could say, no, I can't promise that. Or if you think you can promise it, then you can promise it, but then you would have to keep it. But it would be wrong. What would be really immoral would be to lie by saying yes, and you plan to tell people. That would be horrible. But if you mean it, and you think you can keep it, then you could do it. But it's hard to keep that promise. Because, yes.
Can you talk a little bit about the white lie or the medicinal lie? Because I have trouble with, telling the truth when that will lead to a terrible injustice.
Well, here's what I would say. So according to this analysis, If you're actually gonna use a direct lie, then that would still be wrong. And some of the ways to think, first of all, in the realm of medicine, I think that used to be more common, you can correct that, yeah, and now it's more like, what's that word, informed consent. You know, and now I think we're beyond that, where people do wanna know and the family wants to know, and what was sad about that old practice was people lost like a whole year when they could have been reconciling with each other and loving each other and so on and so forth, so that, I think we've seen that that's wrong. But in these other cases of, what you call white lies, or, I think the quickest way to see that it's still wrong is to ask yourself what happens when the person finds out you lied. It's very sad. They suddenly, that feeling when someone you love, like I was just in Sam Harris's book at the end, he put in a lot of his readers wrote to him questions like that. And someone said, what about lying to get someone to a surprise party? But the thing is, or I don't know if any of you, I'm never gonna play it again, have any of you ever played the game Mafia? Well, it's a game, I'm not gonna explain all, some of you have or no? You have, yeah.
Of course I have.
So, okay, so without explaining the whole game, you sit in a circle and some people are mafia, some people are townspeople, and there's a mayor. And I mean, I did it once with students and professors on a trip to Italy. We were up all night playing it for like every night of the week. And but the thing is, you have to lie, even though it's in a game, you have to lie to succeed, to win. You have to lie, but it's in a game. So some people justify it that way. But the thing is, one of the people told a lie to me in the game so well that after the game was over, I just had this like feeling like, wait, you can lie to me like that. And so I just don't think it's worth it to tell lies to people when you think it's gonna help them with, even if you think it's gonna help them with something. Because you are using their trust against them. And when they find out, that's worse than whatever would have happened for your relationship with that person.
What about competing intentions? Your intention is to do good, but that would necessitate a lie to avoid evil. So your intention to tell the truth competes with your intention to do good. The classic example of that would be during World War II, where the Gestapo knocks on your door and you say, well, any Jewish people live here?
Right.
And you're supposed to say, well, you mean those people with the funny looking hats who are upstairs having dinner?
Right.
Or,
Okay. Yeah.
So, it seems like, oh yeah, those people are right up there.
Okay, right, okay, so a few things in that, and then after you, we get Father Riley's question, and Riley's question. There's a few things in what you said. First of all, back to the beginning of my talk about intention and object. So I'm claiming, well, the general point is, there are some actions which you may never pick, no matter how noble your intention, because they are intrinsically evil. And I am making the argument that lying is one of those, telling a direct lie. Then you said, oh, they're upstairs, they're wearing the hats and they're eating lunch. Notice, I never said tonight that you have to tell the truth. I only said, don't lie. There are times when you should zip your lip. There are times, as the Catechism says, when you should use discreet language. There's all sorts of times when you're actually required to, in this case, misdirect some people. But now, when you bring up a situation like the one you just described, in a situation like that, which is much different than these lies we're telling to each other all day long, which just needs to stop, it's so harrowing that even though the catechism says, don't lie, use discreet language, you're like, how am I gonna think so quick on my feet? A lie is the best way. And that's a good question. The catechism just says, use discreet language, and then it goes on to the next paragraph. But the ideal situation would be something like a way that you could say something like, I don't know, let's say they were in the attic of your garage, and your garage wasn't connected to your house, and the Nazi says, are you hiding Jews in this house? And you say, no, I'm not hiding Jews in this house. But you mean the house, not the garage. So that's called mental reservation, and that was developed a lot in the Middle Ages, like when, or later than the Middle Ages, when they knew the Catholics, I think primarily in England, they knew the Catholics wouldn't tell lies, and they were trying to get them into a tight spot between losing their soul with lying or giving themselves up to be killed. And so people were using that, and so this idea of mental reservation developed. But the thing is, if you overuse that, people start not to trust you too. That's when Shakespeare says Jesuitical, he means that that overuse of. But so I don't know. The best would be if in a tough situation like that, you could figure out a way to save the people and not lie. But I grant you that it's hard, and also, to go in favor of your view, of what you're suggesting. I don't know if it's your view. I once was giving this talk at a week-long course. It was mostly adults. It was like this, but it was a week-long course on a broader topic, and this was just one of the days. And this was interesting. One of the women in the group, her husband wasn't there, but he was an undercover police officer, and she said they had a good relationship, but she said, I remember her saying, she said it openly in the class, that fact that she knew he was a professional liar, like always kind of bugged her, let's say, in the relationship. And then, but the other thing, this might not have, I don't think this was in that talk, but this whole topic of lying became a huge subject in the Catholic blogosphere online when that guy David DeLawden lied through his teeth in all the abortion clinics to capture the people on film saying that they were selling baby parts. And a lot of people, myself included, think he shouldn't have used lies to do that. Because now those abortion people are going to be, they're going to take the gloves off if you're going to lie to me. But, sorry, there was this one comment thread on there where some cop said, I don't care about all this. I save girls from sex trafficking, and I just go in there and buy them, and I lie. And then I get them out, and they're safe. And I don't care about your silly rules. I'm doing it. He wasn't saying that to me. It was just in a comment thread. So, so there's a debate. Like, I think Janet Smith disagrees with me. She thinks you could lie in those situations, if I remember correctly. But Father, did you raise your hand before?
No.
Oh, I thought you raised your hand. Okay. All right. So I think that'll be, unless there's a, okay. Oh, what do you got?
Okay, so if you were an integrity leader, like there's this criminal that was like, he like committed a very bad crime, and you like said you have to like say something to make him admit to what he did, like is that lying?
Not if you do have to say something to get him to admit what he did, so you're right about that. But if you want to be a good person, the thing you say to him to get him to talk can't be a lie. Good? All right, good question. Jack?
Yeah, I just want to say one more thing, because you said it earlier, and like how lying is, what you think is, especially among your students, like they think nothing of it, but don't you think because we've had this whole situation where we're afraid to like insult people, hurt their feelings,
Right.
everything, more than we are to tell the truth.
Right.
So that, a lot of our society has become walking around the truth because we don't want to hurt people's feelings.
Right, and that's really too bad, because a lot of times we could grow if people told us the truth.
Right.
Think about how, because of that rampant problem, how many people have just kept going down a path that they could have been protected to if someone had the courage to just tell them the truth in a charitable way? You're right, I think we've overdone that.
Right, overdone the feelings
Yeah.
protection, yeah.
Right, right. So, okay.
Excuse me.
It's okay.
So I have one of my children, I knew, as a mother, sometimes knows when they're telling the truth or not.
Right,
So all I said was, if you're not telling me the truth, and people find out, are they ever gonna be able to believe you at all?
right,
And that was the end of the conversation.
right. No, that's a big one you tell kids. Plus, and the other one is, if you lie, you better have a good memory. Because you gotta just, because you'll mess it up later. But if you tell the truth, you don't have to worry about that. Yeah. So, just the last little point about the assisted suicide, which Bishop Lewandowski has asked us to try to help not pass, because it's a little bit different this year. As I said, you can go over to PEG right after, and it'll take you like a minute each to do it. On there should help you. But the thing is, the bill, which I talked about last month, it's called medical aid in dying, or medical, that's a lie. Medical assistance in dying is what we do. We help people go through the natural dying process. Medical aid in dying, what they're calling, is giving somebody an overdose on purpose so they can drink it and be killed. That's not medical assistance in dying. That's killing someone to end their pain. So the only way that the pro-life thing, what's funny, not funny, if it wasn't so tragic, it would be funny. They know that if they tell the truth, nobody will vote for it. That's why they got rid of the word physician-assisted suicide, uccidere, to kill, because it was off-putting. So they use a euphemism, which is really a lie, because medical assistance in dying does not describe what physician-assisted suicide is in reality. But they have to lie to get people to vote for it, because it's not justified, and people know that intuitively. Okay, so head over to PEG, and thank you very much.